how do you learn your history? How do these young women, let's say, get introduced to our history and connected? It's very important for us to be grounded in a past, in a tradition, to know you come from somewhere. And that's why history is so interesting. History is it's just so fascinating, but men make it so boring. Yeah. And patriarchy makes it so boring. It's men's history is about wars, right? That's right. You turn to the History Channel, war. That's what it is. That's all they care about is just fighting, who's on top, who's the boss, who's bossing who's beating up who. That's men. Okay, good. You do that, but let's talk about history. Let's talk about why we do what we do. Where did this come from? How come? That's so interesting.
Yeah.
We knew men's history. Yeah. Boring. Forget it. But the real history of real movements in this country, for example, being raised as an outsider, red diaper baby in a communist family. I was always an outsider. I always had that outsider perspective. I never accepted the mainstream. I never accepted the conventional wisdom of, the stories about, democracy. I love this country. I'm so grateful to be living where I do in this time. But I always challenged and questioned, that saying, question authority.
Uh-huh.
Well, you don't hear that too much anymore because authority is so vague. Like, what's authority? Like, what? You can't define anything. Everything's changing all the time. Nothing is anything, like in my columns. The minute that lesbians got a voice, the minute that women got ourselves together and started saying, hey, we're here too, let's take a look at ourselves, all of a sudden, you can't know who you are. All of a sudden, it's identity politics. All of a sudden, we can't really define that. But as I said, and I love quoting myself,
it's okay.
No matter how the sands shift, the sands of gender shift, or the tides of gender flow, it's men who are going to rule the beach. And I also said, smoke and mirror games are perpetrated by those who mean to be in control when the smoke clears. And I quoted Gandhi, if you remember, in one, maybe you didn't get that one. Gandhi, who said, first they ignore us, then they ridicule us, then first they ignore us, they ridicule us, then they attack us, then we win. Okay? And what I said was, after quoting him, I may be paraphrasing him, I don't know exactly what he said, but he forgot, or he didn't know about confusion. Then they confuse us. As soon as we get a theory, as soon as we get a way to think, and things make sense, then all of a sudden, nothing is nothing. Everything is nothing. And then you're confused, and where am I, and who am I, and what am I doing, and I can't really depend on anything. I remember when before I was a lesbian, I had left my husband.
Uh-huh.
And I was in this consciousness raising group. No lesbians. But
here in New York?
In New York, 1971.
So around the days that Kate and Flo and all, when it was all going on.
Oh, yeah.
The Red Stockings, did you believe, what groups did you belong to?
None of them.
Okay, you didn't go to any groups.
My own friends. No, I didn't belong to any groups.
You were playing music and
not
down in
really,
the village?
not them. I wasn't. No, the village was in the 60s. That was the folk music. I was heterosexual. I wasn't a feminist.
That was 6. Okay.
71 or so. I'd been married. I had an infant, and I was in New York in a feminist consciousness raising group, which nobody knows about. This is women getting together, we're talking about our lives, listening to each other, taking each other seriously, making connections, supporting each other. This was unheard of, which has a whole other really interesting history, which I won't get into now. So I was in this group, and it then made it possible, really, for me to have a life and get a life. Well, thank you for doing the concert.
Doing the concert?
My concert.
Oh, it worked out pretty good, didn't it?
Yeah.
I thought it was a good crowd. It was a good thing.
I love that crowd. They're so...
Sorry we didn't make any money. I've never done a sliding scale before, And the thing is like when people would come to the door, I didn't even act, they just hand me $10 and walk in.
That's
and
all I expected.
And I go, what? Oh, well.
Well, if it's 10 to 20, that's
what they
all
do.
That's
Yeah.
legitimate.
So, anyway, about 8 people paid 20 out this.
Did they?
Well, we make 630, so somebody must have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was a good time.
Yeah, good.
And it's my community. This is like my hometown. It's my hometown.
Yeah.
And they'll talk to me in the middle of a sentence. They'll interrupt me. And they're wonderful. They're great. It was such a contrast to Marist College.
What was Marist like?
Well, the kids, they were wonderful too.
Were they?
And I love an enthralled audience. And they were sitting there, just speechless.
Joanne said that you did a real good show. That they were real.
They liked it.
They really
they liked
attention.
it. You could hear a pin drop. I mean, they were absolutely mesmerized. I could see them sitting there, just taking it all in. And of course, to me, it's such old stuff. But I know they have never heard anything like that before. And I'm telling them about the communists and the
stories
and the mob and American history that we don't. We were talking about American history, right?
Uh-huh.
You don't ever learn that if it wasn't for the FBI, the Communist Party would have collapsed years before it did. The FBI supported the party. It's like to infiltrate. They infiltrated. Half of the membership of the party were agents and informers. My career, I owe thanks to an FBI informer who was my first manager. Because I was a communist when I was 16. I joined the party. In 1956, that's when you could go to jail for being a communist. They put the communists in jail. And in fact, the workshop I'm doing at SUNY tomorrow is McCarthy hated queers too.
Oh, yeah.
Homosexuals
Oh, yeah.
and commies. Those were the two twin eagles. Well, I'm all of that, everything. And I'm Jewish, which he didn't dare say, but that's what he meant. Now McCarthy, was an apprentice of Joseph Kennedy, that slimy scumbag Nazi, father of a dynasty of killer men, killers, the Kennedy men. They're just uncovering this 25-year-old murder now that they think that this, a Kennedy man. Joseph Kennedy, he mentored, I keep saying, Joe McCarthy. So did, the Cardinal and the church guys. They all trained him and schooled him. Now, they went after communists, and the FBI was right along J. Edgar. And I remember that very well. That's right, and I remember the book, and I remember that whole thing. I remember when they killed the Rosenbergs. Now, why did the FBI...
I lived on a farm in Iowa, knew nothing about politics, but my mother was so upset about the Rosenberg thing, and that there was a woman that just really stuck in my, and I remember the picture of them before they were going to be, killed. And
they could have been my parents,
had a real...
This was so frightening to me. This was my people. They're putting us in jail and killing. Well, I'm talking about a million things here, but one of the reasons the FBI went after communists was because the communists were the mob's only competition for organizing unions. In 1930s, mid-30s, the mob went after, they decided to organize unions. Because when you controlled a union guy, you controlled his whole family. You controlled, huge numbers of people. So they decided, well, let's organize unions. We can control. The communists were their only competition. So the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover was paid off by the mob. You know how? He was a gambler. He played the horses. He loved horse racing. He had a box, a permanent box. He used to go to the races all the time. Well, the mob would tip him off through Walter Winchell, another red-baiting, journalist. Through Winchell, the mob would let J. Edgar know what races were fixed. So that's how he made hundreds of thousands of dollars from going after the communists and leaving the mob alone and denying, oh, there's no organized crime. That's silly. Now, this is American history, see? But you don't get taught that in school. Nobody tells you that.
No, and they were all facts.
Totally.
J. Edgar Hoover was a
cross-dressing. Oh, yeah. They all were homophobic faggots.
Totally
Homophobic gay guys. Now, how about the Nazis? What is Nazism but the perfect male organization? Is that right? It's exactly the ideal way for men to organize themselves without women and without the civilizing influence of women. See, that's already getting into whole other kinds of thought that are kept from people in order to preserve patriarchy and in order to preserve men, certain, like 3,500 mostly white guys, preserve their running the world. So you don't teach this stuff. You don't let on that the mob has controlled just about every president since and including FDR. That doesn't get taught.
In the Catholic Church. In the Catholic Church. I mean, the mob.
There, well, yeah. So anyway, it's all falling apart now. It's all really getting way out of control, anybody's control. But on the other hand, it's still in control of these guys. So like I said, everything changes and nothing's changed.
Nothing changes.
So my job is to go around spouting off, preaching, educating, whatever I do, and I use music, and I use anything I can to storytelling, jokes, to get the point across, which is really to be true to yourself and to put yourself in a context and use your brain. Get yourself a consciousness. Think about things. Consider things. I mean, that's going against all the culture that we started talking about, all the quick information, no time to think, no time to process, no time to do anything. Everything's an emergency. People are so busy now. Everybody I know is so busy.
So you came from, I want to get back to back in those days, the 60s. You came from Philadelphia?
Yes.
With Bill Cosby, you said. Now,
right.
What do you mean with Bill Cosby?
Well, the two of us.
You came together.
Well, all right, the story is.
You knew each other from school.
Well, we met each other. I was going to the Fine Arts School of Temple, which was a separate campus from Temple. He was going to Temple. He's older by a couple of years, but we graduated during the same year. And this guy I was telling you about, he wanted to be a manager, and he saw Cosby somewhere, and he said, come to New York, and I'll make your career. And he said the same to me, and let me manage you. So he brought us to New York. And before we graduated, it must have been about February or March, he took us into the city, into New York, into the village, to the Gaslight, where John Mitchell, who had run it for years and had made it very famous as the poetry where people read bohemian poetry, beatnik poetry. Well, John Mitchell was running it, so this guy got us an audition, and we both auditioned, Cosby and me, for Mitchell. He said, fine, I'll hire you when you graduate, come back in June. We said, great. Meantime, we're getting jobs in Philadelphia. We worked the Underground, all these clubs in Philadelphia. We'd get jobs.
Do you work together sometimes?
Sometimes, yeah. Oh yeah.
Double bill.
Yep, because he sold us together. So, comes June, we graduate, we come into New York, we walk into the Gaslight, Mitchell's gone. Where's John Mitchell? Oh, he sold it to a couple of guys who, one of them brought his father-in-law in from Florida who was, out of work. And so this southern guy from Mississippi, who had been in Florida, comes up to run the Gaslight. Now this guy was in the lumber business. He knew nothing about music, about anything. This Mississippi Southern, he had been a Democratic committeeman under Truman. Very interesting man. Anyway, he comes up, he's managing it. We walk in, all right, we're supposed to start. He says, well, I don't know you. And we said, well, we auditioned for John Mitchell, and he hired us. He said, well, you didn't audition for me. So we auditioned for him, and he hired us. So that's one of the stories. And that was in 1962, in the summer.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and that was when folk music, oh, so exciting. It was so fresh, you know. I got hired at the Gaslight, 62, along with these great people that I mentioned at the show, like Tom Paxton was a regular, Carolyn Hester, regular, Buffy St. Marie, Patrick Scott, John Sebastian, Johnny Harold, the New Lost City Ramblers, the Greenbrier Boys. I mean, there were just such Happy and Artie Tram. There were Ian and Sylvia would come in.
That's what I was trying to think of.
They're wonderful, wonderful performers, really gifted, very innovative, important musicians. And comics like Flip Wilson. Now, Flip was wonderful, wonderful. And he impressed Kaz so much. Kaz was just starting. And I remember one night he came back from the Apollo Theater. He had just gone up to the Apollo. And he came back raving about this comic he had seen up there. Well, it was Flip Wilson. And he could not believe this comic. Well, Flip came down to the Gaslight. We became really very good friends. What a great guy.
He seemed like he was.
And so funny and original. And just a gem, this guy. And he was a good friend of ours. And Jim and Jean were there. Oh, just so many wonderful performers. So I got in with that crowd, and I was singing international songs. I was singing songs of 14 languages. That counted Spanish, Argentinian, Chilean, and Mexican as 4 languages, 14 languages. I said, but I did international songs. Now, this was my progressive background, my folk progressive background, like the Almanac Singers I was talking about, like the Weavers. I grew up with Woody Guthrie and Josh White and all these wonderful singers, Paul Robeson. I knew all these people, the Red Army Chorus. I listened to their albums. I wore the records out when I was 3 years old. I played the Red Army Chorus. So I was surrounded by these international folk songs because of my political, cultural upbringing. So I sang many that was my niche. Now, as I said, you could have 50 guys playing guitar, playing the same songs, one after the other, but 2 chicks, not women, you didn't say women, 2 chicks singers. Back to back was bad programming, that's what that was, and yeah, we all agreed with that. We all say, oh, it's bad programming. No, you need to spread it out. So as a result, what did that mean? Well, for every 20 guys, there was 1 woman. And fortunately, I was one of those women, and I was able to work fairly regularly in those days. So it was a very exciting time. Got married, moved to Florida, to Miami. Opened the club there that lasted like 9 months, and then we went bankrupt. We had no money. And so we went out of business and eventually moved back to New York.
So you came back up here.
So eventually we came back up here and noodled around. Sam managed, my husband, managed, what was that club on Bleecker Street? The Blues Project played. The folk boom had really kind of peaked. And there wasn't the excitement that there had been before.
Okay, that was like what year?
Now we're talking 1969. Yeah, and actually it was moving into much bigger venues. I mean, Dylan was filling Convention Center. This was after like a Rolling Stone. This was, the Love and Spoonful and the Byrds and these people. They were filling stadiums, and it became a big business. It got out of the homegrown little coffee house intimate setting and into the big venues. And then the big promoters took over, as they do, and then it became a different kind of event.
Really, it's like 69 now, and you're back, and he's managing a club, and now when did you meet the woman?
I got pregnant, had a baby, and separated from my husband. Well, I got into the CR group, and then I separated. And I didn't know, was I a lesbian? I didn't know. Somebody said, Alex, are you a lesbian? I said, deep in my heart, I hope I am. I don't know if I am. I shocked myself that I said this. Oh my God, where did that come from? But I did hope I was. And then lesbian feminism had come along. And all of a sudden, I had some politics again, after I had left the party 10 years before that, because it wasn't working for me. No, I had outgrown the party. So I didn't have politics, but I'm a political being. I was raised with politics. This is the center of my world, always. So I found some politics. The most exciting, coherent, comprehensive, interesting, fun, effective politics ever on the planet, I found. So did thousands and thousands of other women. This was the 70s. Set me on fire.
Sexual politics, now the Red Stockings, all those
The
groups.
second wave. We found lesbian. We're always lesbianism. As long as there's women, there's lesbians. As long as there's been feminists forever. Put them together, and you got something that changed everything. Changed me. I remember my first woman-only event. I went to the church in Washington Square on Washington Street in the Village, an old church, and there was a group called It's All Right to Be Woman Theater. And that was a repertoire group of a handful of women who did shows about, original shows about women, about our lives. And they had women-only shows. And I walked in with Adrienne. She was an infant. I had her in a little sling. And I saw this performance. And we were all sitting on the floor. It was packed with women. In those days, packed the place.
Were you married at the time?
No, I had separated.
We separated.
We separated, yeah. I was I didn't know what I was, where I was. I walked into this church and saw this women-only production. And there was a room full of women. And I was walking on air for the whole, days afterwards. Well, this was heaven. And before that, I am getting back to the point I was making that I forgot. When I joined the consciousness raising group, our first Thanksgiving, we decided to have just us and our kids. There were a lot of kids in the group.
No men.
No men. We're going to have Thanksgiving dinner just with women. And I thought about this, and I thought, that is so sad. No men, that is just so sad. That's really depressing. I can't imagine going to a Thanksgiving without any men. Oh, how sad. That shows where I was at. That I couldn't even conceive of why would women want to be together without men. It made no sense to me. Well, we had a ball, and I didn't stop. Then I went to this women-only show, this performance, and loved it. And then I was in this consciousness raising group, and then I went and did a radio show on WBAI for Liza Cowan, which I mentioned in the article. And she had put out a call. She was doing a show called Electra Rewired with a number of other women. And she was hosting. It was like midnight to 2 or something, once a week. It was kind of a late night show. And I heard her put out an announcement for women songwriters. Because she knew all these men, but she didn't know any women. So I thought, well, and I just started writing songs about my life. They weren't particularly lesbian songs, but they were woman-centered songs. And so I gave her a call, and this was in the spring, and I said, well, I write songs. And she said, okay, can you come to the show? I said, well, I can. I'm going away for the summer. We made a date for the next December, like months and months in advance. Well, in December, after the summer where I left my husband, or he left me, I made it so he left me, and I still didn't know what was going on. I go to WBAI to do this show that we had arranged months before. And I walk into the room, and I see her, and I just smiled. I just smiled. And we were just, there were these long pauses on the air, and we just fell in love on the air. The next day, her mother calls and says, what was going on with you two on the air last night? What did we know? It took us 3 months before we managed to go to bed together, and then we were out on the rooftops, on the radio. We were lesbian, and feminist, and so that's how I came out on the radio.
Then as soon as you met her, and then you guys became lesbians, and then that's when you went right out shouting for women's space only. Because you had, your CR group had...
We started developing our politics then. And we knew we were lesbians. I thought all lesbians were feminists. And I quickly found out, no, that's not true. I also thought that all lesbians we'd agree with together. We'd all agree on everything. I really thought that. It's so obvious. What's to disagree with? You know, we love women, we want to be together, we have a culture, we make a community, we want to live our lives together. What's to disagree with? Well, you know, we had these huge expectations of each other. And of course, then, you know, we started developing our politics. Now, we got a hold of these, I don't know how well, there was a great network. You know, it was very...
Yeah, you were in New York at that time, right?
I was in New York, yes.
And all the consciousness-raising groups.
Oh, yeah, New York was cooking.
Oh, yeah.
There were a lot of wonderful women around then, just really interesting. Well, Jill Johnston was writing back then, and just all kinds of great, great women. And so we got a hold of this, it was a paper from Seattle called an Amazon Analysis. And it really was women-centered theory, lesbian feminist theory. And then we got a hold of some writing called the Clip Papers. Ever hear of that? Well, that was a lesbian separatist theory about patriarchy, about women being together and thinking together and consciousness. And it was Susan Cavan and her girlfriend Marika who wrote that. Now Susan's a professor at Rutgers. She's brilliant, and so she wrote this Clip Papers, and that got published in Off Our Backs, which was just starting up then. And then we read that. That fired us up, and we started, Liza and I started this COW, Community of Women, on the Upper East Side. And then I met Kay Gardner at when there was a regular coffee house Sunday afternoon of lesbian feminist liberation, LFL. Meeting at the Soho firehouse that burned down. But every Sunday we'd meet there. And there were the same 50, 60, 70 faces every Sunday. And one time they had a talent show. And I thought, I'm going to sing my songs. Now I started writing more lesbian songs. So I had a little repertoire, maybe 8, 9, 10 songs. And plus I adapted a couple of popular songs. And so I'll tell you, you know, after all those years on stage as a folk singer, I had it down. But for this little, this dump of a firehouse, for these 50 New York dykes, I was so nervous. I was shaking. I could hardly catch a breath. I was terrified. And I knew they'd love the music, but I had never sung these songs. These were different. These were about women, and I sang them. And they loved them, and that's a whole other story. I've written about it in Lavender Jane is Born, the column. And I raised the money to produce the album on a lesbian life space, which is this other group that formed. I mean, there were lesbians everywhere. They were coming out by the tons, by the boatload. And we had this boat ride, a circle line around Manhattan. It was for a lesbian life space. There were 500 dykes on this ship. This boat. It was fabulous. And the New Haven Women's Liberation rock band was playing, and it was just great. And all these women who had heard me sing these songs, and Kay and I had started playing together. I met her at one of these Sunday get-togethers. I go upstairs, there's this woman playing flute, and we get together and start working out arrangements. We played a few times, and women were saying, make a record, you gotta make a record, you gotta make a record. So on this lesbian life space cruise, I went around to all these women. I said, okay, we want to make a record. How much can you lend us? I raised $3,000. And we made the album. We found Marilyn Reese, an engineer, and she had the keys to this 4-track recording sound, spoken word sound studio. She never recorded music. We didn't know what we were doing. We made Lavender Jane. We pressed 1,000 copies, pasted the covers on. We went down and printed our own covers, and got the inserts printed by Tower Press. It's still in business, but you know, 2 women were running it, lesbians, running this brand new women's press. We got them to print inserts. We printed a cover that I designed And we stuck them on. We had a party with some of our backers, the women who had lent money. 1,000 albums, regular white record albums, stuck the covers on. Have all these out. Now what? You know, it never occurred to me you have to distribute these.
You're
You're going to sell them. I never thought, oh my God, how am I going to get them out? Well, Off Our Backs was publishing Lavender Woman in Chicago. Remember that was a lesbian newspaper. There were a few lesbian publications. There was just the beginning of women's bookstores. There was Lavras Books here in the village, and a few bookstores. Well, I took out some ads. Those albums disappeared. Because there was never a lesbian album before that was available. Now, A Few Loving Women had been released, and that was a talent show.
What year was this? Tell me again.
This is 1973, in the fall of 73.
Okay.
It's exactly
Signed,
25 years ago.
Signed Chucky and Lovey to Warner Brothers later. Go ahead.
And so, and I had already had my run-ins with Columbia and Elektra, and had blown contracts there. Those are whole other stories, very funny stories. But I knew I had to do it myself, fortunately. Well, the record had to be made. I feel like I was in the right place at the right time with the right stuff, and the forces that this had to happen. And I was just in the right place. And I've always been in the right place at the right time. Well, that was the first 1,000, then that financed whether we could afford to print the covers instead of pasting the ones on the first 1,000. And instead of an insert, we printed on the back of the jacket. And then I took an ad out in Ms. Magazine, a classified.
Which really worked in those days, didn't it? Lots.
First of all, it was affordable.
Yeah.
And it worked like crazy, because any woman who was interested in feminism, consciousness raising, you know, anything, Ms. That was it.
That's okay.
That's right. And that got the record out internationally. It was an internationally distributed album, and it was the biggest selling women's music album in Europe. It outsold everything else. I sold from my house. I would pack them up, get orders, sell them to bookstores, sell them to individuals. I'd sell them for years and years till 1978. And then I made a deal with Lady Slipper Music, and then they distributed. Well, I have to answer. To my inner imperative.
Yeah.
I have to answer to my community. I have to answer to my nearest and dearest, and some really smart women who will challenge me when they feel like.
I noticed that in your writing too, and I like that. You said your friend River, who you just stayed with, and when they got management.
Oh, that was way back in the 70s. Yeah, they sent me a petition. Unfeminist, unsisterly, rude.
How did you feel then? I mean, what do you remember?
Well, I wrote them a long letter.
Did you feel like you were right then?
Yes.
And they were wrong?
Yes.
Or did they make you feel bad about yourself?
Well, actually, that issue I changed right away. That was when I asked non-lesbians to leave for that one song that I had written, My Lesbian Wars. It's on Love and Politics, that album. But I had just written that about lesbian business. And I didn't want any non-lesbian listening. I thought, it's none of your business. It's about us, so leave. Well, that was very rude. And it was rude. And it was unsisterly, unfeminist. I don't know. I think lesbians have a right to be together without anybody else. That's great. But, you know, it was something that I got into too much trouble. And I stopped. You know, I'll change. I change. I can listen
That means
to
you're big.
criticism.
Sure.
Well, whatever. It works for me. It's totally self-serving. Everything I do is calculated to make women love me.
Well,
So, all right. So that's everything I do is self-serving. It's, you know, when I work community building, so I'll have a community. That serves me. I don't do it because I'm a do-gooder. I do it because it's good for me. I want to build a strong, conscious community because that's where I want to be. So it's for me. And it happens to work for you too. That's great. I'm so glad.
Yeah.